Hey, welcome to Haphazard Homestead. I'm glad you're here. In this video, I'm going to give you 5 tips for getting the most out of foraging for wild edible plants in the springtime. I'm going to start off by talking about the fear of missing out on some of the great opportunities for eating wild edible plants in the spring. Then I'm going to go out and get some weeds for making a spring weed omelet. I'm going to call it the fear of missing out omelet, the FOMO omelet. If you watch this part of the video, I think you'll appreciate the 5 tips for making the most out of the foraging season that I talk about at the end of this video. If you find this video helpful or interesting, I'd appreciate a thumbs up, and feel free to share it with any of your foraging friends. Do you feel like you miss out on opportunities for eating wild plants in the springtime? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have any tips for making the most of your springtime foraging season, I'd love to hear about those in the comments below too. A couple of weeks ago, Kim Mack left a comment on my video where I made a wild spring salad out of 11 different weeds and trees. Kim said a lot of things, including this: I feel like I miss all the spring opportunities. To that, I say, welcome to the club. I eat a lot of wild plants, and I still feel like I miss a lot of opportunities, because I know that I do. So let's talk about the fear of missing out. There are so many good wild plants to eat in the spring, and spring can come and go so fast depending on the weather where you are. On the upside, the fear of missing out can motivate us to get out and look around, and that's always a good thing. On the downside, the fear of missing out can cause people to pick plants that are in poor condition, like dandelion leaves from plants that are in stressed conditions. The fear of missing out can cause people to pick plants that are way past their prime when they just won't taste any good. And some plants can accumulate high enough concentrations of compounds that we shouldn't be eating them at all. On another downside, I've seen people so focused on eating wild plants that they don't even bother to get the identification right, or they go around tasting this plant and that plant because it looks like it would be tasty, or it looks similar to something that they think that they know. That's no good. That's no good at all. I don't like scaring people when it comes to eating wild plants. So let's just get out. I'm going to go get some weeds, and I'm going to make this fear of missing out omelet. And then I'll come back with my 5 tips for getting the most out of your springtime foraging season. All right, let's get going. In a lot of places, the bittercress is already done. Take a look at this. You've missed it, at least as far as the greens go. It's already starting to go to seed. It's a lot on the tough side there. What about these leaves, huh? Their stems are more stiff. They're going to be chewy. No, we've got to look for some bittercress that's in better shape. Another way of doing this is finding a patch that's down here. It's been in the grass. There's been a whole patch that's in better shape. Look at that. I'm going to take this whole thing back to the kitchen. Break it off down here. Here's another plant that comes and goes pretty fast, and that's the Tamarack. That's new growth that's coming off from where I picked it before. It still tastes good. It's starting to get a little more resin flavor, but the Tamarack is one whose needles don't last for a long time. They have such a nice, delicate flavor, but they don't last. You're gonna miss out. That's the way of the world. I'm gonna take this whole branch in. Another one that's getting towards the end of its season is the elm seeds here. The seeds of the American elm. Then the leaves will be good too. We'll use those for a salad, but I just want the seeds for now. Look how many seeds there are. They're so easy to pick. This purple dead nettle is another one. It's got that square stem. You can see it has a weak stem. It's really only this part that we're after, just the tops. But what happens as the top gets older, it gets this in here where the flowers were. This will be fine for in an omelet. Here's another one that eventually gets just too old, and that's the chickweed. This is a nice patch because it was in the shade. It's in the grass. Look at all that. See how it grows so leggy and long and lanky? I'm just going to tear it off right there. I do want to check, make sure there's nothing in there like grass or other plants. Get a few dandelions, pop them off. All right, that's easy enough. You can see the English daisies, the lawn daisies in the grass. Just going to come in and get some of their flowers. It's easy enough to pick their flowers. Even things like wild field mustard may not last all that long. Come in and get their flowers. But then there are new flowers. Here we have the red bud flowers. They're so good. that are so sweet. That is so good, a nice little tart flavor. So here's what we're gonna get is some of this lamium. I'm just gonna come in here. It's a mint too. It's got the four-sided stem. It's kind of got the same kind of flower head as that purple dead nettle. Let's just get that, huh? How about that? I'll get that one too. Here's what we've got. The bitter cress, which is mostly stems, not much in the way of leaves, but these stems are still good. They'll be just fine sauteed. We have the American elm seeds. We'll just take apart like that. We've got the chickweed. That's a nice base for anything. You got the English daisies. The dandelions. And people have asked whether I use the dandelions straight like this. I don't. I just do this and get the petals out. So that's all I do is just twist and get the petals out. It goes quick and easy enough. I have the field mustard flowers. I've got the red bud flowers. I've got other videos about that. You can go check out my other videos. I use a lot of red bud. Doesn't take long to get a mess of red bud. Then we've got the tamarack needles. And see, we want to make sure we don't get any needles in there from something else. And what we want to do is make sure that within this, just go through the tamarack and make sure you get the little wooden pieces out. If you get any of those wooden pegs, go through that and take those off. And then that leaves us with our dead nettles here. This is really interesting. This one is the purple dead nettle. This one has a lot of different names. A yellow archangel, the yellow dead nettle. And why do they call it a dead nettle? One of the reasons it was called a dead nettle is folks said that the leaf looked like a nettle. This doesn't look like a nettle at all, I don't think. But you can see it much better here. There's a much better case for these looking like a nettle. This looks a lot like a nettle if you aren't going to pay attention. It's got no stinging hairs. Just the same little flowers, just a different size, that's all. See them right in there? Look at that. Hi, how are you? I'm the same. I'm just tinier. So what we're going to do here is put these in the omelet. I'm going to saute this. I'll put in some of the flowers. I'll put in some of this, maybe some of that. You'll see. And I'm also going to use some frozen chives. I'm going to use some chives that I froze last year. And then I've got some elephant garlic flowers, some preserved elephant garlic flowers from last year. Pretty good. That's gonna be good. There it is. There's my omelet. Here comes the omelet that did not make it onto the plate. You can see what it's like inside. Hey, look at that. That is good. It's got a lot of greens. It's good. Well, I hope you enjoyed that omelet, but I know you didn't enjoy it as much as I did because I got to eat it. So here are my 5 tips for really making the most out of your springtime foraging season. Tip number 1 is to learn to identify a lot of different plants. Now, I've said this before in other tips videos, there are so many good wild plants out there, and the more of them that you know, the easier it is to take advantage of the opportunities that are there. You notice in my omelet, I used 10 different plants. Tip number 2 is to make a map or a notebook of good foraging spots. I'm not talking just about a general bunch of notes or a general map. I'm talking about one with specific locations about specific plants. In your yard, it might just be a mental map, but for going farther afield, a more detailed map or notebook comes in really handy. This lets you learn the plants at your own pace and be ready for next spring in a reliable way. That's because you will be able to track the flowers and the fruits or seeds of the plant as the seasons progress this year and in future years. This works really well for the perennial wild edibles like wild asparagus, dock, pokeweed, Japanese knotweed. And don't forget that some trees and vines have a lot to offer for good eating in the springtime too. Tip number 3 is to learn how to extend the spring foraging season. I'll cover this in a lot more detail in a future video, but here's a couple of quick ways to do this. One is to look in places where the plants have to keep growing quickly, like in the shade or in the tall grass, and learn how to prepare the plants in different ways depending on their condition. That's what I did in finding the bittercress and in deciding to saute the bittercress and the dead nettle too. Tip number 4 is to preserve some of the harvest. I like to eat, but I can only eat so much, so I preserve some of my wild harvest too, especially for plants that are in really good condition, that are really tasty. There's a lot of them and they're easy to pick and that they're easy to preserve. I freeze more than anything else, but I ferment some things, I pickle some things, I dehydrate some things. I don't prefer canned vegetables, but wild greens can be canned just like garden greens. There's really no difference on that score. In my omelet, I use wild chives that I froze from last year, and I use some elephant garlic flowers that I had pickled in vinegar as well. Tip number 5 is to move on. Let it go. The seasons change. That's part of the enjoyment of eating wild plants. As spring moves into summer and summer moves into fall, there's always new plants coming into season. In my omelet, that's the last of the bittercress that I'll be using for this season. But it's the first use of the redbud flowers. Those redbud flowers are nice to see. Well, I hope things are going well at your place, and it seems strange to say it, but I hope you're seeing a lot of weeds, especially the ones that are good to eat. I hope you'll join me for my next video too. If you want to be sure to be notified about it, be sure to click the subscribe button or that little bell notification symbol. Thanks for watching. Bye.